Okay, good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. This meeting marks the first committee following the local elections and the AGM in May. My name is Councillor Justin Wrench and I will be chairing this meeting. Before we proceed with the main business of the meeting, I'll go through a few items of housekeeping. We are not expecting a fire alarm this evening, but should one sound, please can members use the exits at the rear of the car park and assemble in the car park. Please can you make sure that your phones and devices are switched to silent, and if members wish to speak during our debates this evening, please can you indicate by raising your hand and I will come to you at the appropriate time. Please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and to switch them off when they have finished speaking to avoid any interference. Can I also remind you that this meeting is being webcasted. I will now proceed to the main business of the meeting. So agenda item 1, apologies for absence. We have received apologies of absence from Councillor Richard Van Delken and Councillor Lynn Walters. We are awaiting and expecting Councillor Ron Ramage. So as there are no more apologies, I will now proceed to item 2, declarations of interest. So do members have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest that they wish to declare this evening? Please state the item and the nature of your interest. I wasn't expecting any, so that's good. So as there aren't any declarations, I'll now proceed to item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. So please note that members can still approve the minutes even if they weren't present at the last meeting. So please can I have a proposer to approve the minutes as an accurate record of the meeting of the Governance and Audit and Scrutiny Committee held on the 20th of April 2023. Can I have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Mundy, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Jeffress. So the minutes have been moved and seconded as an accurate record. All those in favour, please indicate by a show of hands. Thank you. The minutes have been approved. I'll just take a moment just to sign those. Thank you. So agenda item 4, public question time. I can confirm that there are no registered speakers for this evening's meeting. So we will now proceed to agenda item 5, our key financial indicators. These are as of the 30th of June 2023. And the report is set out on pages 6 to 11 of the agenda. And can I invite Phil Myers, our Head of Finance, to present the report.
So thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. And I think, firstly, I suppose just to say, obviously recognising we've got quite a few new members on this committee, I don't think any question will be a wrong question, and we obviously recognise that the agenda might be sort of quite heavy in content and detail. So by all means, during the course of the evening, obviously officers will try and help you navigate some of that technicality. In terms of this item, so this is a regular item to this committee. So it's a suite of key financial indicators that the committee has had an interest in monitoring. So it covers a range of the council's activities that impact on its finances. Normally there would be a little bit more information in the report around the financial position and regarding budgetary spend, but we are looking to align that information with the information that gets reported to senior management and cabinet. So the first quarter's financial review has just been completed, and that will be reported to cabinet at its meeting in September, and then this committee will receive that information as part of this report at its next meeting, which will be in early October. So it won't be too long before you start to see that information, and that information will then be sort of a regular part of this report. In terms of what's in the report, so I'll just sort of pick out some highlights. So the report covers the capital programme. So the council's capital programme is currently just over 13 million, 13.1 million. So it's quite modest in comparison to our investment that we've undertaken over the last few years, and you obviously recognise some of the significant projects that have been delivered. So, what we'd expect is not all of that capital programme will be spent in the current financial year. We anticipate around half of that, so 6.6 million being spent in the current financial year, and then the remainder in probably next year, and that's just how projects will develop. So some of the key projects in the programme at the moment, we've got some projects around town centre improvements in Witham Halstead. We've got the House of Community Grants scheme. We've got quite a bit of reinvestment into our IT infrastructure and property. We have an ongoing disabled facilities grants programme that helps to support adaptations in people's homes. And we have projects around things like the Rural Prosperity Fund. So actual expenditure to the end of June was just shy of £600,000, £595,000. So quite low at this stage, but that wouldn't be untypical. And what you'll actually see is in subsequent quarters, that spend will generally increase quite incrementally as projects get further down progression and delivery. Capital receipts. So capital receipts, these are a valuable source of funding for our capital investment. Again, the receipts that we're anticipating in the current year is probably less than we've been used to in the last few years. Nevertheless, we're anticipating receipts of 3.9 million in the year. And those will generally come from right to buy sales. We don't deal with those direct, so that's through an arrangement we have with Eastlight, and that was following the stock transfer back in housing stock transfer back in 2007. So we continue to benefit from the sale of dwellings under the right to buy rules. And then we also have a number of sites that have been identified as potential development sites on which we've got offers have been received and accepted on those, but they are subject to satisfactory planning consents being achieved. So again, at the end of June, the actual value of receipts received or accrued is again quite modest against the target of around £300,000. And I think it's fair to say that we have seen a slowdown in right to buy sales, and that's probably not unexpected given the current economic environment. In terms of commercial property lets, so this is property that the council owns and let. So we have around 273 units that are currently available for let, and these include some of the new ones up at the Plaza and in Victoria Square. So currently we've got an occupancy of around just over 90%, 90.5%. So still fairly robust in terms of occupation. Several of the vacant units are also near to completion for lets, and we've also got various space within this building that is including those units within Causeway House that is vacant space that we're obviously trying to let, and we've got various parties that are expressing interest or showing an interest in that space. In terms of council tax collection, so council tax collection appears fairly resilient at the moment, so 30.5% collection rate at the end of June, which is slightly better than last year. I think we just have to exercise some caution there, because we know that the cost of living crisis will continue to impact on households, and we know that there are the impacts of interest rate rises have still got to feed through to many households. So it is a position that we do keeping close eye on at the moment. In terms of business rates, though, actually their performance, collection performance, is actually down. And again, it's something that we'll be monitoring closely. This may be symptomatic of the withdrawal of some of the support that government introduced over the last few years around COVID, and then more recently energy support. And we also did have a revaluation of business rates, and Braintree, particularly the Braintree district, actually saw a disproportionately or much higher than average increase in the rateable values of businesses. Now, lots of those businesses will be protected through transitional relief, but there will be some businesses that are being asked to pay more this year. So, again, something that we will need to track closely. The report covers or provides some information about write-offs. I think it's fair to say that our write-offs are very modest given the sums that we are actually collecting. Many of the write-offs actually relate to arrangements where we have to effectively cease recovery action whilst we have pre-agreed payment plans in place. So the debt is essentially written off, but we still continue to collect through those arrangements. And if those arrangements do default, then we do restate the debt, and we would then introduce the appropriate recovery action as well. We will be undertaking a review of some of our old historic debt. So it may be that in later reports to the committee, it may be that there will be an increase in those write-offs, but nevertheless, I would anticipate that still being a relatively modest sum in terms of the amounts collectible. But I think it's important that we do housekeep and we don't write off debt very lightly. So in terms of debts outstanding other than council tax and business rates, the position there is set out in the appendix. Most of our sundry, what we call our sundry debt, is related to housing benefit overpayment, and again we recover those sums through arrangements that are restricted in terms of the amounts that we can actually collect from individuals. Now, those are overpayments that may have occurred due to claimant errors, and therefore we're entitled to make those recoveries, but often those recoveries will be over a long period of time. Supplier payments, so this is how timely we're paying our suppliers. So we have a target that we set ourselves of 98%, and you can see at the end of the quarter we were achieving, well, we're more than achieving that at 98.5%. And then there's information around treasury management. So this is the council's investments, and there's a combination there of short-term investments and long-term investments that we have in what are called pooled funds. So they're invested in a mix of equity-based or bond-based funds and property. And again, what we've seen there, short-term investment returns have been elevated by the recent rises in interest rates, and it's actually not that long ago that we were actually achieving near zero on those investments. So the position has changed quite significantly over the last few months with the rises in interest rates, and that's led to significant uplift in our income. Our long-term pooled funds continue to perform well and provide a strong level of income. The funds are subject to shifts in valuations, and that those shifts will reflect market sentiment. So those values do go up and they do go down. And you'll see in the Appendix B the position on individual funds. So we've got a mix. We've got some funds that are actually below the value, and some that are actually achieving or have got significant unrealised gains. and with the overall position being a net gain of around £1.5 million. So that gain is in effect a paper gain, so it doesn't actually add to our usable resources, and it's only when we sell those investments, if we were to come out of those investments, that the values would be realised. So I think that's the points I'd just like to raise, and happy to take questions on that, Chair.
No, thank you, Phil. Do any members have any questions for Phil on his report? Councillor Ball?
Well, just a naive question, I suppose. Do we benchmark against other authorities in our figures or not?
Certainly we benchmark them, particularly on the Treasury management, and I know on one of the reports later on the agenda, which deals with the annual report, there's some benchmarking information that we've included in there in terms of what we've done with our Treasury management activities. But we do sort of provide information across authorities in Essex and that on various things from time to time. So,
does any other member wish to speak? Councillor Jeffress?
Where you have a write-off, it says you are still collecting some money from them, so it's not totally written off, is that right? And does that still appear as a debt, or is it taken out of that and put somewhere else, so to speak? Does that make sense?
yes, perfectly. So those are the sort of what we call the voluntary arrangements. So yes, the debt is effectively written off. So because we're precluded from taking any further formal recovery action, and then we collect, as you say, through a agreed arrangement, and then that would, as that payment is made, the debt in respect to that would be restated and matched with the cash. If that arrangement is defaulted, then the debt outstanding would be restated.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Just on page 11, the credit rating of investment holdings pie chart, the unrated funds, would you be able to just, again, this is probably an ignorant question, but exactly why, what are unrated funds, and are they inherently more risky than rated funds?
So essentially, the unrated funds are the long-term pooled funds. So those are the ones where we are invested in equities, bonds, and property. And it is just the nature of those funds that they are unrated, unlike the money market funds, which are rated. So there is risk around those funds, and the way that risk is managed is that the investment has been made on the basis that it is for the long term. So the risk is really around those valuation movements, those shifts in movement, and therefore, in entering into those investments, we assured ourselves that we could be in those funds for at least a 3 to 5 year period. In actual fact, we've been in those funds a lot longer. So that risk around those funds is managed through accepting and holding them for long term.
Okay, if there are no remaining questions, we are asked to note the report of the key financial indicators as at the 30th of June 2023. Can I take it that the report has been noted, and please indicate by a show of hands? Thank you, members. The report has been noted, and I'll now proceed to agenda item 6, the Internal Audit Annual Report of 2022-23. So, members, the report for this item is set out on pages 12 to 32 of the agenda, and please can I invite Angie Mitchell, our Audit, Insurance and Fraud Manager, to set out the report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So this is the annual report at the close of 22-23, and the outcome of this report feeds into the annual governance statement, which is item number 11 on your agenda tonight. The report itself sets out the basis of the report, the work that's been done by the team, the arrangements for the team at Braintree Council, the different sources of assurance, the overall outcomes of audit work, and commentary on performance of the internal audit team. Just a couple of things to draw your attention to. Paragraph 6.8 identifies the, apologies, not 6.8, paragraph 6.4 identifies the limited assurance reports undertaken during 22-23. The last item in that list, the committee will receive a report from the corporate director at the next meeting, which will give some more detail on the council's response. And then table, the second table at paragraph 7.3, so just over the page. This shows the spread of the audits completed against the strategic risks and corporate priorities. So we aim to make sure we're looking at the things that are most important for the council. There's one strategic risk that wasn't addressed during 22-23, risk number 6, but that is included in the audit plan for 23-24, which is the next item on your agenda. That's a brief summary, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Angie. Do any members have any questions? Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. I have a few questions. One you've already alluded to, which is the point about limited assurance. I think there were 19 audit reviews in 22-23 and at full assurance, but 4 were of limited assurance, which I believe indicates not meeting minimum standards. Can you say how this number of limited assurance compares with last year? And the last one, which I think you said the corporate director may give us more information on, I believe it refers to Horizon 120, and I think it says there are 6 high priority recommendations before business case funding will be committed. Is this of concern, and have these priority recommendations been met?
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. So in terms of the number, there are more limited assurance reports in 22-23 than the previous year, but we do aim to focus our work in the areas where there may be concerns and where there are corporate priorities and strategic risks. So it's not surprising that we will get some of that nature at times, and it's not necessarily a comparison against minimum standards. It's just saying that we have a number of concerns relating to the controls within the area that we've audited, issues relating to either governance, risk management or internal controls. So a number of things that we'd like to see addressed. So it's not necessarily a minimum standard, and in something like the major projects, there is a lot of other work and a lot of project management processes that have been put in place. In terms of the management response, we haven't received the formal response at this point. That will be presented to this committee in detail at the next meeting. But I believe there's a lot of work going on in the background to resolve the issues identified.
Thank you. I have a couple of other quick questions, if I may, on the internal audit. I think I saw at page 20, it referred to the Strategic Information Governance Group, and that didn't meet in 22-23. What is the role of that group, and is there any? Did it not need to meet, or why didn't it meet?
So just So that group is really focused on information governance issues, so considering, for example, data breaches, if there are any, and the Council's response, just looking at general data security arrangements, and so on. So it's a focus group from officers drawn from the governance team, the monitoring officer, the head of IT from internal audit, and other interested people. So it's a core group just to make sure that the corporate arrangements are where they should be. Not meeting doesn't necessarily mean there's nothing going on in terms of oversight of those areas. It's just that we haven't convened, and we're hopeful that there'll be a meeting soon.
Okay, thank you. Last one on this, if I may. I think on page 28, the medium priority recommendations for audit year 2021-22, I think it says 13 of 19 recommendations are pending confirmation. I assume that means that they're not complete. Is that significant, or is it a catch-up, or what?
So we need to do some more work on following up audits, following up the recommendations that are made. So I wouldn't wish to mislead you by saying they're not complete at all. Clearly, they will have been followed up at some point, and we need to do some more work. So they are on our list to review, and we hope that the next time I'm reporting to you, we'll be able to demonstrate some progress in those.
Thank you. Do any other members have any questions? I have one, if I may, Angie. Back on page 22, which you've already alluded to in paragraph 6.4, the asset management is due to be actions resolved by October 23, and also the suppliers and contractors' resilience by November 23. It says with the CCTV and GDPR compliance that the service is developing an action plan. Do we have any kind of timescale when that will be kind of resolving itself?
I don't have a timescale for that, but we are following it up with the head of IT.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, members. If there are no further questions, we are asked to note and accept the internal audit annual report of 2022-23. Can I take it that the report has been noted and accepted? And please indicate by a show of hands. Thank you, members. The report has been noted and accepted. I will now proceed to agenda item 7, the internal audit plan for 2023-24. The report is set out on pages 33 to 52 of the agenda, and I will ask Angie again to set out this report. Over to you again, Angie. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this is the current year's audit plan, and we've taken into consideration where we haven't completed audits from the 22-23 plan. If they're still priority and relevant, then they've been brought forward into this plan. So the report itself gives a bit of background on the planning process. The one key element of that is conversations with the senior staff at the council to identify changes, concerns, major projects, anything like that. So anything that helps me to decide what to put in the plan. We also take into consideration any other sources of assurance that we can get. So if there's another form of independent assurance, so some kind of external independent assessment that we can place reliance, then we account for that as well. So the plan itself is split into a number of areas. The audits that we undertake are linked to corporate priorities and strategic risks, so they're identified in the plan. And the first element of the plan relates to the audits that we'd started from the 22-23 plan but completed in the current financial year. Then we have the plan for the current year. At the end of that, there are a few items which, during the audit planning, management identified that there was further work to be done. So, rather than a formal audit, we'll be following up with management on those items. Then there's a reserve list, a wish list. The plan itself is a challenging plan for a small team to complete, but there is also a wish list that should we have the time, there are other areas that we would look at. And this time next year, we'll be looking at those in consideration for the 24-25 plan. So we'll keep those under review. And then there are some other items in the strategic planning which we're looking further ahead. And again, we'll give consideration to those at this time next year. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions, members? Councillor Walsh?
Thanks for your patience. Just one question on this. On page 51, it mentions 11 areas where there are no available audit days. So it's just a general question, really. Does internal audit feel that it has sufficient resource to cover all the areas that need to be looked at under internal audit? I think one of the 11 areas, and maybe I've misunderstood this, but one of the 11 areas is new IT projects, which I think under the KPIs has got £300,000 of capital allocated. So it's really a reflection. Do you have in the team sufficient resource to do all that you want to do in internal audit?
So in terms of resource planning and allocating staff to audits, I need to think about sufficient coverage to enable me to give an opinion at the end of the year, like the previous report to this committee. So I'm thinking about how much work as a minimum we need to do for me to give that assurance to the council and to this committee. There may be other reasons for not progressing immediately, such as some of these new projects and programmes might be coming on a bit later in the year, so it may be more sensible to think about them during the next rounds of planning anyway. So resources is an interesting one. There isn't a formula to establish what resources we need. It's really about making sure we focus what we've got in the right area, and so long as we can do enough to hit that target for giving an opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Does anybody else have any other questions on this item? Councillor Edwards?
Thank you, Chair. Just on page 51 again, smaller project governance, just identified as an area that's not going to be reviewed. What are the terms of definition for the smaller project?
Okay, so I don't have a formal definition for you, but we're just obviously we've done some work over the last few years on major projects, the big strategic investment projects. But we know the council's doing a lot of other smaller things, and this would just have been about making sure we've got the right protocols in place for those as well. But just as important in one sense, but the focus on the big ones has been the priority in the past years. Yeah, it is something we'd like to do, but we're limited.
Thank you. Councillor Ball?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, on the 11 items that we don't have audit days available for, and specifically with the item that Councillor Walsh mentioned, the £300,000 of new money for IT. I saw somewhere it was mentioned that sometimes we go outside for specialist advice. Would this be something that we'd go outside for, or would it be kept internal?
So you're absolutely right. Yes, where we feel a particular audit would benefit from specialist expertise, yes, we do go outside, and we have done that on a couple of occasions in the past couple of years. And potentially, yes, this is somewhere that we would look to go outside. In terms of cyber security and things like that, we do use external sources of assurance. So the council engages with professional organisations to undertake security checks and things like that in compliance with required standards. So we do use expertise in that way through external sources of assurance, but it is an area we would consider getting technical specialists to look at.
Follow up to that. Is the going forward? Is the more and more, higher and higher percentage of items that we need to go outside for, or is it fairly stable? Will there ever be a case for? I understand that this is possible to have an external internal auditor, or, whether that would use resources more efficiently than trying to do it all ourselves.
Yes, so the public sector internal audit standards require us to have an effective internal audit function, but it doesn't dictate whether that's an in-house function or an externally sourced function. And so there are some authorities that operate under shared services or buy in their internal audit expertise from firms such as accounting firms. So yes, that does happen, and that is an option. There are others like us so far that have brought in technical specialists for specific audits on the plan where we consider it appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so we are asked to endorse the internal audit plan process and draft internal audit plan for 2023-24. So please can I take it that the internal audit plan process and draft internal audit plan for 2023-24 have been endorsed? And please indicate by a show of hands. Thank you very much. That has been endorsed, and I will now proceed to agenda item 8, the internal audit update, including progress against the 2022-23 and the 2023-24 internal audit plans. So this report is set out on pages 53 to 66 of the agenda, and please, again, can I invite Angie Mitchell to set out the report.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this is effectively closing down the work on the 22-23 plan and giving an update on the progress on the 23-24 plan. So obviously we started work on it before tonight. So the Appendix 1 gives the outturn, if you like, from the 22-23 plan, and Appendix 2 is the current year plan. So you'll see there are a number of audits in progress and 1 or 2 completed. The final appendix is the outcome of the audits that have been completed since the April report to this committee. So that's giving the assurance level for each of those audits that have been completed, along with a summary of the scope, a summary of the findings and recommendations, and the management response. Chair, happy to take any questions.
Okay, members, do you have any questions? Councillor Edwards?
Thank you, Chair. Just on page 66, the follow-up reviews on the limited assurance reports, the housing application document verification 1920, that seems like an awfully long time for one strand to be going on. Would you just be able to provide a bit of background on that and when you might expect that to be resolved?
Yeah, so we've been exploring with the service various options associated with document verification. There was some training for a number of key staff in the authority, I think that was around 2019, related to identifying fraudulent documents. So we had a trainer in with some really good examples of documents and what to look for and where to go for advice and things like that. So the service is looking at building on that, and particularly with regards to electronic documents and so on. So we live in a different world now, and so there's more work to do to develop processes relating to that.
Does anybody else wish to speak on this item? Okay, so as there are no further questions, we are asked to note the progress and performance against the 2022 and 2023, and also the 2023-2024 internal audit plans, and also note the progress into respect of addressing the actions identified in the external quality assessment of the internal audit function. So can I take it that the report has been noted, and please show by raising your hands. Thank you, members. The report has been noted, and I will now proceed to agenda item 9, the local audit update. So this has been outlined on pages 67 to 83 of the agenda. Firstly, I will invite Phil Myers to speak on this, but we're also joined this evening by Steve Bladen from BDO, who is an external auditor, and he has travelled tonight to be with us, so thank you, Steve. So after Phil has given his update, we'll go straight on to Steve, and then there'll be opportunity for questions afterwards. So I'll pass on to Phil first, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, there's quite a lot of national coverage around local audit at the current time. I'm sure members may be aware of that. And there's been several parliamentary committee reviews, and a lot of government departments and stakeholders are scratching their heads around how to bring a resolution to some of the issues that have risen over the last few years around audits and the completion of those. So I thought it'd be useful just to bring up an update of where we are in terms of Braintree in this regard. So I suppose our last set of published audited accounts were our 2018-19 financial year accounts. And then the report basically sets out what the position is regarding each subsequent reporting year up to what would be the latest reporting year, which would be the 2022-23. So hopefully the committee will note that for each of the years that we've got outstanding audits, that actually the council has actually met its requirement of producing draft statement accounts. And with the exception of the 22-23, they've been subject to the statutory public inspection periods. Regarding the 22-23 accounts, those accounts were published slightly later than the deadline that was set by government, although nevertheless significantly earlier than the 21-22 accounts. So, significant achievement there by the finance team to achieve a deadline that be moved forward following some relaxation of deadlines during the COVID period. With regard to the 22-23 accounts, have not been issued as what we call certified accounts, so they've not got the Section 151 off certification on those, and the reasons for that are set out in the report. And the implication for that as well is that that's delayed the public inspection period for the time being. So in terms of the audit, so taking 1920 as the earliest period of the outstanding audit, so I think that audit, I think it'd be fair to say, is at an advanced stage of completion. There was some delay originally regarding the completion of the work, which was around some extended work around the use of resources, value for money conclusion that BDO wished to undertake. And then unfortunately, those accounts then did get caught up in a national issue around, that's affected all councils around how infrastructure assets are dealt with in their accounts. So it's quite a technical issue, the infrastructure assets piece, but in order to resolve that, there has been a bit of a workaround. So CIPFA, who are the accounting body that regulates and prepares the code that all local authorities have to prepare their accounts in accordance with, they've issued amendments to that code, and the Department for Levelling Up, DLUC, they've had to issue some statutory regulations, and those will be in place until a longer-term solution around infrastructure assets is found. So that did actually cause further delay to the accounts being signed off, because until that was resolved, any accounts that were still effectively open from an audit point of view could not be dealt with. So I think in terms of what's been reported previously, I think, and Steve, when he provides his update, will confirm that they're not waiting on anything from the council regarding the 1920 accounts. In terms of 2021, so our understanding at the moment is that a substantial amount of the audit work has been completed, and there was an interim report that was made to this committee that was setting out that at that time the findings of the audit were proven satisfactory, but obviously highlighting that the work was still subject to completion and the normal internal review processes that the auditor would have to undertake. In terms of 21-22 and 22-23, there's been we've got no start on those audits as of yet, and I think that's really been around the sort of prioritisation that has been brought to try and get the earlier years resolved. The report does set out that there are some sort of other impacts from this. So it mentions around the housing benefit assurance work that we're required to have undertaken for the Department for Work and Pensions. So there has been some delays in completion of those as well, and we're looking for those to be resolved as soon as practical. The second part of the report then sort of deals with some proposals that government have recently issued. So there's a letter attached to the report from Lee Rowley, the MP, the Under Secretary of State, and a separate appendix on the detailed proposals around addressing the backlog in local audits and getting the audits completed. So in essence, those proposals sort of summarised in paragraph 5.3 of the report, and sort of proposes what is called a reset of the system, basically, and that's proposed in a series of statutory dates, and the current proposed dates are set out in the report on page 71. And those statutory dates are the dates by which local authorities and auditors will be asked to conclude matters on the audits. So the aim is that the auditors will provide as much assurance as possible on each of the years, and I know Steve will probably elaborate on what that means. It does mean that opinions may have to be limited in terms of the opinions on the individual accounts. And there is emphasis still on the reporting on value for money, and the statutory auditor powers remaining as a priority. So still not a done deal yet, so there's still subject to further consultation. So things may change, those dates may change, but we will sort of wait to hear on that. There are also some proposals that have been outlined in the accompanying papers around how the longer term changes might be made to try and avoid a repeat situation, and some of that is around workforce capacity amongst the sector, but also looking at what are the requirements for authorities in terms of their financial reporting arrangements, accepting that some aspects of what we have to report is perhaps of less interest and relevance to stakeholders, but consume quite a lot of audit time. So we will have to wait and see how those proposals develop. So I think that was all I wanted to say, Chair. Through you, hand over to Steve.
Thank you, Phil, and welcome to the committee, Steve. And yeah, you may proceed with your report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't disagree with anything Phil has said. I'll probably just add a few points to provide a bit more context for members where I can. So in terms of the 2019-20 audit, as Phil said, that one is still outstanding. Appreciate that has been outstanding for quite some time now. Originally, it was owing to value for money work, which is an opinion that we give alongside our opinion on the financial statements. So we look at the council's arrangements for governance, financial sustainability, and we give a separate opinion on that. So we did do a piece of work that looked at linked to procurement, but linked to governance as well. And as Phil said in his report, we did find some weaknesses there that will result in an except for value for money conclusion opinion. Appreciate the council has long ago dealt with the issues that will lead to that. But that was one of the factors that led to the delay in the issue or the conclusion of that audit. As Phil then said, there was a national issue around infrastructure assets, which led to further delays in the completion of that audit. We have now worked through the issues on infrastructure assets that we would need to do in order to conclude that audit. I did come to the last audit committee. Appreciate not everyone will have been here, and said that we would hope to have been in a position to have now concluded that 2019-20 audit. Unfortunately, we have not been able to do that. Again, it is linked to resources and the availability of people to conclude the work that is needed to put us in a position to conclude that audit. I can only say that at this stage, I don't think that audit will be that 1920 audit will be concluded in September. But I do expect that later this year, in October, November, we will have the resources available to conclude that audit. And as Phil noted in his when he was talking about the paper, the government has now put in place a backstop date to say that audits should be 1920 audits will need to be signed off by 31st of December this year, in whatever form that might be. So if you are unable to give a fully clean audit opinion, you might have to limit that in some way to say, to kind of highlight where you are able to provide assurance and areas where you may not be able to provide assurance because you haven't concluded or haven't completed the work on that or in a particular area. I don't think for Braintree's 1920 accounts will be in that position because I think the work is sufficiently far progressed to be able to give a fully clean audit opinion, but there are still some steps that we need to complete. They are linked to our own internal processes rather than the council. We're not waiting for anything from the council, so it's purely concluding our own internal processes. In terms of 2021, so that is another audit that we have started, and again, it is fairly well progressed, but we are not yet in a position to conclude that audit. Again, I suspect that it will be, if not later this year, early next year before that audit is concluded. And again, there is a backstop date relating to that, and I think that one is currently 31st of March 24. So that is when that audit has to be brought to a conclusion. In terms of later audits that Phil mentioned, so 21, 22, 22, 23, we have not started any work on those audits, and I think at this stage it's too early to say when we will we'll start work on those. Or what our opinion might be, because to a certain extent it might depend on the arrangements that the government are currently consulting on. I guess the one thing I would probably add to what Phil said is I think there's a strong desire within government and to a certain extent within councils as well for auditors to be able to move to what are the latest set of accounts because that's what members of the public are probably most interested in. While I appreciate I suspect we'll be able to issue an opinion on 1920. I appreciate it's quite old now, and what members are more interested in is what the latest position is. And I think there's a desire amongst everyone to get for auditors to look at those. I'm happy to try and answer any other questions members might have.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Do any members have any questions? I'll just take a note of everybody at this point so I don't have to stop too many times. And yeah, we'll start with Councillor Jeffress.
Thank you. Is there any impact on the council or indeed our residents because of the lateness of these? I'm just thinking if a business anybody's business was putting in their accounts late, there would be some implication to that business. Is there a similar implication to the councils, or is it a different type of thing entirely?
Yeah, Steve, if you give your take first, and then possibly Phil, if you could give a perspective from internally inside of Braintree of the impact this process has had.
So I think from an external perspective then, I don't think there's any financial penalties on the council for not having signed off accounts that are signed off. I guess what I would see as being the kind of key issue is the reputational risk of not having financial statements signed off, because I think there's always a perception that there's an underlying reason for them not being signed off. That isn't the case with Braintree. It is purely because, if you look at the national statistics with I think it's getting on towards 600 sets of accounts not yet signed off. I think it's a national issue. There's no underlying reason within the council for that. It's purely a factor of where auditors are at the moment and with the issues around resourcing and the increasing complexity of those audits.
Thank you. And Phil, have you got any take on that?
Well, I think, as Steve said, there's no sort of financial penalty. I think from our point of view the audit of the accounts is a key part of the assurance framework. So, and our financial planning that we undertake for our budgets, etc., is based on the fact, those accounts, telling us what our resources are and that. So it's always, useful from the head of finance section 151 officer to get that external sign off to say, well, yes, everything's fine. So, but we're not. We don't anticipate, and we've never had any issues with our accounts. So, but I think it is just that, that is just the bit you're looking for that external assurance. So you can do that planning on a basis where you've got that assurance in place. I think from a practical point of view, I think the delay has impacted internally on the team, because you can imagine there are, well, at the moment, 4 years of accounts where, as Steve said, 1920 is done, but there's still some work probably doing around 2021. What work needs to be done around 21, 22, 22, 23, that's all got to be done at the same time that the finance team is trying to run the BAU. We're now into sort of budget process. Won't be long before we're preparing the 23, 24 accounts. So there is a real pressure on the team internally around this, and I do think that may be one of the things that get fed back in terms of the backstop dates, how they'll be practically be able to be delivered with the resources that councils have got. But
Thank you. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Steve and Phil, for being open in description. Building on what my fellow councillor Lynn Jeffries has said, if I understand it correctly, the last set of accounts that have been fully completed are 2018-19, and 2021, the full audit, it remains incomplete. In 21-22, we don't have a start date from the audit. Now, I do appreciate there's been the pandemic, of course, and from the correspondence, there are national factors, but from a layperson, and I'm no more than a layperson, and residents as well, this would seem, at least at first glance, to be of some concern. Do you have any particular concerns at this delay, and can you tell us when these audits will be completed? Will it be in advance of the national backstop dates?
Steve, would you be able to give us some assurance on that, please?
So the audits will be completed by the backstop dates because it's a statutory deadline, and the government. I have to emphasise it's only proposals at the moment. It's not been fully set in. They're not. Trying to think of the right words. That they're not. I think they're still being consulted on before they're finalised. But assuming that those dates go forward as the dates, then yes, we would give audit opinions by those dates. What I can't say is what those opinions would look like, because potentially auditors might be in the position of having to issue qualified opinions because they haven't done the work on those sets of accounts. But it looks like auditors are being directed to conclude their audit so that you can move on to the latest set of accounts. So, for example, 21-22, where we haven't started an audit yet, and I think I'm correct in saying the backstop date for that was the 31st of March 24. I can't, at this stage, I'm not able to say whether we would be able to conclude that audit before that date, or whether we would be in the position of just having to issue a disclaimer opinion on that set of accounts so that we can move on to 22-23. Unfortunately, I'm just not able to say yet what those opinions will look like and what assurance we'll be able to give. I think we will be able to conclude 1920 and 2021 before those backstop dates with full audit opinions, but I don't know about 21-22 at this stage. So I hope that answers the question, but apologies if you want to come back on that.
Just very briefly, we don't have any particular concerns arising or indicators of concerns from the fact that they're not fully complete?
No. So I think, as I said earlier, in terms of 1920, it's purely our internal processes we need to go through. I think for 2021, we did bring a progress report to an earlier audit committee, and there was no significant issues identified in that. We do still have some work to complete, but it's not significant amounts. So from those, there's no indication to us that there's any significant issues. But as I say, we haven't started 21-22 or 22-23.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. So, hypothetically, if you didn't finish the audits before the backstop dates, I appreciate it's probably quite a basic question, but what kind of opinion then would you be able to put forward? What would the term for that opinion be?
So my expectation is if we wasn't able to finish those audits in their entirety, so they would be qualified in some way. So what I would expect we would do is, within our audit opinion, we would set out details of the areas where we haven't completed our work, and by definition, the rest of the accounts we don't have any issues over. So I think that's the sort of opinion that you would be looking at if we aren't able to complete by those
Fantastic, thank you. I've just gone back and looked at the minutes from the April meeting when you were last here. It says that BDO intended to provide council officers with a detailed plan as to when its upcoming audits would be taking place. I just wanted to know if that plan had been provided.
No, it hasn't yet. I appreciate we did undertake to do that, and we haven't done that. Part of the reason is because we haven't been able to complete the 1920 audit as I would have hoped we would have been able to. I will, however, undertake to provide as much detail as I can to Phil and to members if you want me to circulate it to you once it's been to Phil. It will probably take another 2 or 3 weeks for me to be able to provide that, but I can provide that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Again, when Aphrodite, I appreciate a different person, was in front of the committee in January, she said that if the 1920 audit was completed by the end of January 23, then the 2020-2021 audit would be anticipated to be completed by the end of February 23. So following that logic, if you're expecting now that the 1920 audit is completed in October, November, does that mean that we can expect the 2021 audit for December, January time?
I would expect it would be fairly soon after, yes, yeah. I don't want to give precise dates, but yeah, it would be in fairly short time after that. Bearing in mind the backstop dates aren't actually that far apart for those 2 years.
Thank you. Do any other members wish to speak? Councillor Wright.
Is it basically just a resource problem, or was there changes in procedures and things like that that caused the whole lot to be out of sync?
There's a lot of issues that have all come together to kind of create the backlog. It did start around COVID time when people were working from home, and it was taking longer to get audits completed at that time, so that introduced some delays at that point. I think it's fair to say that not necessarily Braintree, but the complexity of local government accounts has increased over recent years. So there are lots of councils that are doing things like investing in commercial property, which are reflected in the accounts and take longer to audit. So there's a knock-on impact on just the amount of time that it takes to deliver an audit portfolio. Excuse me. There's also, I think it's again fair to say that there's been a fair amount of challenge by regulators in terms of the amount of procedures that auditors do on some of those complex areas. So, for example, valuation of properties, the work that we do around those now is significantly more than we would have done several years ago. Similarly, pension liabilities, we do a lot more work around those than we did a number of years ago. And then there is, as you said, Councillor, there is a resourcing issue as well. So that it's a number of factors that have all come together to create that kind of perfect storm. You've then had things like infrastructure assets that we spoke about, which meant there was a period of time where no audit opinions were issued. So I think it's more than just one factor. There's a number of factors that have all come together to create that. And I think, may I just add just one point? Some of the points that Phil made, because it's all very well having a plan in place to address the backlog, but you need to make sure that it doesn't reoccur almost immediately. And I think that's some of the steps that Phil outlined around changes perhaps to the Code of Audit Practice around how property valuations are undertaken and disclosed in the accounts is aimed at simplifying the work that auditors have to do in future, or lessening the amount of work that we have to do in future, so that we don't immediately build up another backlog.
One other short question. The 23-24 accounts you say should be ready by March 25. Is that up to date or up to normal times, or is that still a delayed response? No.
No, that date is a date that's been pushed back from what would normally apply for the. And I think that's just recognising that in order to get these earlier years done, that is going to cause the auditors who are in place from 23-24 that they can't obviously conclude their work until all the prior year pieces have been done.
How long will it be before the backlog is caught up with and we're working to correct timetables?
Well, I think the impression that you get from the backstop dates is that they see that there may need to be some concession around the 23-24, but come 24-25, that hopefully things would be able to be back on a more normalised timetable. That's
Councillor Prime.
It's just a quick question and maybe a silly one. Is there a financial penalty for not having these audits done on time?
No, the consequences are the ones that I spoke about in terms of perhaps reputational damage. There's no financial penalties, and obviously Phil outlined the internal issues that it creates, having a number of years' worth of accounts open, just in terms of staffing, things like budget setting and dealing with auditors, dealing with audits that are quite old now.
Okay, I'd just like to add a few comments and questions myself before we finish this item. I think it's probably fair to say that we're in quite a muddle. It's quite a long withdrawn process, and we have been given assurances. I think some colleagues have alluded to other people sitting in this chamber over the period of the last 18 months that I've been on this committee, and we have been given promises or definite certain assurances. I think dating back to April, we were told that by the end of June this would be done, and or 1920 would be completed, and the roadmap. We're still sitting here tonight and we're given promises that we might get a roadmap within 2 to 3 weeks from this committee. Can you give us some assurance that the roadmap will be completed this time? And could you also just explain what happened? Why did June not get signed off? Because we're not talking about national infrastructure. That happened a long time ago. As far as I'm aware, there hasn't really been any major changes within that period of months from the last committee. So is it a staffing issue? Is it a capacity at BDO? What happened to Braintree? Why were we not prioritised? And can we please, it would be really nice to be able to sit here and turn up to the next committee that actually something that has been said by someone at BDO has been stuck to and been achieved. So could we get some focus on that and some assurances? But just to really give us some understanding of, because I know some of the new members may not have been aware of the national infrastructure, but that was quite a long time ago. There hasn't really been a lot going on in the last few months. So why has that not been completed?
So it is purely a staffing issue. It's a resourcing issue around having sufficient resources to be able to do the work, to conclude the audit, the work that we need to do to conclude the audit. So we have dealt with the infrastructure asset issue, so that isn't an issue anymore. Unfortunately, the people that I expected to be able to do that work earlier this year, the other work that they had took longer than we expected, and unfortunately that's just had a knock-on impact on Braintree, unfortunately. But in terms of the roadmap, yes, I will undertake to get that to you, and I think, as I've said, our intention is that we will meet those backstop dates, the first of which is later this year. I can't, if your next meeting is in October, I can't promise to come to that meeting, having signed off the 1920 audit, but I would hope to be able to give you a much firmer picture of when that will be done. at that stage.
Okay, thank you. And a question to Phil, just to round this item off, is we've heard about some of the audits being qualified and some maybe having to be compromised to be unqualified. What impact does that have on the officers having a set of audits or an audit that is unqualified? Is it good to get over the line and just to finally get some outcome on the audits, or is it something that maybe you'd rather not have to compromise on given the circumstances?
Well, I think from a professional point of view, I mean, nobody would want the accounts to be qualified or disclaimed. But I think we just have to accept the situation that we're in is not a perfect situation. So, I think Braintree particularly have always had very good audit outcomes from its accounts for as long as I can remember. That's a long, many years. So it is a bit frustrating for officers where we are, but we are where we are. As Steve alluded, I think if we can, get 2019-20, I would hope will be, perfectly fine, because we've already had a audit completion report on that a long time ago, and as it said, it was a couple of other factors that delayed that. So I think, we'd hope that would give a full, clean bill of health, apart from the bit about the value for money. 2021, as we've said, we've had an interim report that said things, looking good there. So again, we'd hope that would be a positive outcome. I think 21-22 is just the one that is probably going to be sitting there with where we might be less happy with the outcome. But if we can get assurance on the 22-23, which I think is what Steve said, that's going to be the important bit, because that is the bit that will then translate to the next auditors who are doing the 23-24 onwards, and that's what they'll be looking for the assurance from that. I think, hopefully then we can, move on from here then.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you very much. Okay, members, it's a little bit more technical than just raising hands on this one, so please bear with me. So we are asked the following: to note the reports that have been put before us this evening, but also for you to be able to delegate to myself, the Chair of the Governance and Audit Committee, in consultation with the Section 151 officer, to agree any response by the Council to proposals for clearing the national backlog of local audits and to embed timely audits. So please can I have a proposer to move these recommendations? Councillor Edwards, and can I please have a seconder? Councillor Bohr. So the recommendations have been moved and seconded. I will now put this to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate by a show of hands. Okay, thank you. That is unanimous, and the recommendations have been approved. So thank you, members. I will now proceed to agenda item 10 to approve a revised risk management policy and strategy. Before I do, Steve, you're more than welcome to stay with us this evening. However, if you would like to leave early, because I'm assuming you've got elsewhere to be, you're more than welcome to leave us early if you wish as well.
Useful for our audience.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So this report has been set out on pages 84 to 105 of the agenda, and please can I invite Phil, the Head of Finance, to set out the report.
Yep. So this is one of our policies and strategies that is probably, to be fair to say, is long overdue a revision. And I think, although I'm presenting this report, I think a lot of credit has to go to Angie for doing a lot of the heavy lifting on this, and has reviewed our previous policy, looked at best practice, and has then sort of drafted what is effectively attached as the appendix to this report. So the actual revision process has involved quite extensive consultation with the management board and the wider corporate management team. So it's coming to this committee really, I suppose, as a consultee as part of that process. So the actual formal approval of the policy will be via Cabinet at their meeting in September. So, and they will obviously take into account any views or comments that might be made this evening in terms of what's being proposed. So I wasn't going to necessarily go through the revised policy in too much detail, but I was just going to draw out some highlights and the important aspects of it. So in section 2 of the policy and the strategy, page 90 of the agenda, it does set out the roles and responsibilities for risk management. And I think that just underlines that actually risk management is everybody's responsibility within the authority, and that's both in officer level and member. And also this committee plays a key role in ensuring that that risk management arrangements are in place and are being effective. There's also in section 2 there's details around risk identification, and again just it's indicating that risk management is not a sort of once and for all process. It's an iterative process, so it's a process that we need to keep under constant review, and we do, as a matter of course, formally review our strategic risks on a biannual basis anyway, and those are brought to not only Cabinet but also this committee. The actual assessment of risk has been revised, so we use a matrix approach, which is a common approach used by many organisations. So that matrix has been slightly adapted from what we used before, so we've got a more balanced scoring of risk, still looking at things like likelihood of a risk happening, and then also the impact of those risks and the potential. What we're also encouraging risk owners to consider is actually what is the risk of an event before control measures are put in place, and then assessing what the impact of those controls are. So we get two sort of measures of risk, and that difference will show the importance of the control measures that are being put in place. So that's a bit more emphasis that we're placing in terms of how we're reviewing our risks as we go forward. Also references around risk appetite, and there's the authority could have a risk appetite in varying ways depending on activity. So it's spelling out that there's no perhaps one set risk appetite. It will depend on the activity involved, and also how risks might be dealt with. So whether we can try and avoid those risks, whether we can transfer those risks, and that could be through just insurance premiums, or it could be through some arrangement, a service arrangement where we can transfer some of those risks, or it may be we just have to accept that there is a risk and we have to deal with that. Particularly around partnerships, and I suppose that recognition that since the last policy and strategy was drafted, we've inevitably grown in the amount of partnerships and collaboration that we do with other organisations. So there's been a strengthening of that section within the policy. So alongside the review of the policy, there is a current review by management going on in terms of the strategic risks. So these are the risks that are considered those risks that could impact on the council's achieving its corporate priorities. So that will come to the next committee, the next meeting of this committee, that strategic risk. And just another comment that part of our member development programme that we've got in place, the next session in September is on risk management. So, and that's also an evening for all councillors. So I think that's all really I wanted to draw out, Chair, and as the Cabinet, the committee are asked to sort of consider and approve for Cabinet.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Ball?
Yes, so I was rather curious, Chairman, looking at 252 risk appetite scales. I'm not used to these descriptions. Averse, of course, we're all familiar with. Avoiding risk is the key objective. Cautious, keeping the safe options. But I wouldn't have thought that at the opposite end of averse is innovative, because innovative doesn't necessarily automatically mean high risk. Depends how those innovations are dealt with, surely. I just wonder whether that is the standard description for the top end of the scale.
Thank you. So there isn't a standard as such, but the terminology has been drawn from other guidance that I've explored. Innovative in this sense is really doing something different, so doing something untested. So completely agree that it might be fairly safe, but if you're exploring something completely new, then it is a bit of an unknown world.
Suggests that one should not be sorry. Suggests that you shouldn't be innovative.
I think also if you read down on 2.54, there's the appetite, but there's also the tolerance. And I think where you're alluding to being the top end of the scale, unacceptable risk would be the absolute top end of the scale. And that would be something that... would you just be able to clarify for that purpose the difference between the risk appetite and risk tolerance in layman's terms as much as reasonably possible, if that's okay, Angie?
Thank you. So yes, if I may just first of all pick up on your earlier point. When we talk about the risk appetite, this is how we're looking at each risk, and we're not saying don't be innovative. We're just saying that our approach in some areas may be different to our approach in others. So it's just understanding what we're willing to accept in different environments. So risk appetites then, the maximum amount of residual risk that we're willing to accept to achieve objectives. So that's in the table there. And sorry, you were comparing that to risk tolerance, Councillor Lynch?
Yes.
Yeah. So the acceptable deviation from the risk appetite. So if you look at the 5x5 matrix in colour, sorry, I've only printed black and white, but if you look at it in colour, you'll see the green is where we're aiming to be. We haven't got a separate risk tolerance band, if you like. Some authorities, some organisations do have an amber band as well, and the red area where we want to get out of. So it's just defining it in those terms. So our tolerance is set by where in that table we want to be.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, members? Okay, so if there are no further questions, we are asked to approve and the revised strategic risk management policy and strategy for referral to Cabinet. So please can I have a proposer to move the recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Prime. So the recommendations have been moved and seconded. I will now put this to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate by a show of hands. Thank you, members. That is unanimous. The recommendations have been approved. I will now proceed with agenda item 11, which is the Treasury Management Annual Report for 2022-23. This report is set out on pages 106 to 116 on the agenda, and you've been very patient tonight, Mark, so I'd like to invite Mark Jarvis, the Financial Services Manager, to present his report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. So this report is for committee to review the Treasury Management Annual Report for the 22-23 financial year. Now, as a reminder for existing members and obviously for new members, this is the third and final report of the 22-23 Treasury Management reporting cycle. Now, the report is fairly technical, so I will not go through in detail, but I'll pick up some of the main items. So the report is broken down into a number of sections, with the first being the economic update, which is provided by our Treasury advisors, Arlene Close. Now, the one thing that I draw attention to this one is how things have moved since we started the strategy. So when we developed this strategy, it was in November, December of 21, where interest rates were 0.1 and inflation was high, but not as high as we've seen in recent months. So obviously that will bear in mind some of the performance data that you see later on in the report. Section 3 of the report looks at the local position. So as at the 31st of March 23, resources available for investment stood at 47.1 million. The table 1, section 3.1, shows a breakdown of how the resources are made up. But there's one aspect to draw to committee's attention is the capital finance requirement, which is our CFR, and basically that stands at 21.5 million. And the reason to draw your attention to that one is that is the amount of borrowing the council is required to, or is needed to fund our previous capital expenditure. So of that 21.5 million, we have externalised borrowing of 5.8 million as of the 31st of March. So basically we are internally borrowing around 15.7 million, or using our excess cash balances to fund the capital programme. If we move to section 3.4, there's a table there that shows the movement in balances. Now, apologies, the movement column needs to be updated before this goes to Cabinet, because obviously it says 10.9 million, and it should say 8.9 million, and that'll be updated prior to going to Council. But obviously that shows that there's been a decrease in our cash balances of £9 million, which was expected due to the fact that at the end of last year we still had a lot of government grants in terms of COVID. We've also had the energy rebates. Now they've actually been paid back or paid out. Our cash balances are coming back to pre-COVID levels. Section 4 and 5 of the report looks at the council's borrowing. Now, some of the members who are here in November will know this, but just to update, at the start of the year we had £6 million worth of loans, and this was in relation to 2 lender option, borrower option loans of £3 million each, with an average interest rate of 4.7%. Now, for those who have not come across lender option, borrower option loans before, or LOBOs, these loans are subject to 6 monthly rate changes by the lender, so which the authority would either be required to accept that new interest rate or repay that loan at short notice, and which would usually be detrimental to the authority. So during the year, the council, in conjunction with its treasury advisors, Arlene Close, looked to refinance these loans. So in May 22, the council refinanced these loans, paying a premium of 1.4 million and replaced them with Public Works Loan Borrowing, PWLB, at a rate of 2.59%. And this resulted in a cumulative saving of 890k savings over the 20-year period. And obviously those savings was included as part of our 23-24 budget proposals. Section 7 looks at our treasury activity and provides a breakdown of our investments. So obviously as part of that table you can see the breakdown of our pooled funds, our short-term investments. It also shows the percentage yield that we've received on those investments, as well as the number of days that obviously it will take for us to recall that money from those investments. If I just talk about the pooled funds a bit more, obviously those funds, given the nature, can go up and down in value. So the values of these investments as at the end of 31st of March was 20.7 million, which was £1.7 million higher than what we originally invested, but obviously it was down from last year's high of 21.9. Moving on to section 7.10. Now obviously this is quite technical. Well, obviously that's the nature of local government. The Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities published a consultation on IFRS 9 pooled funds, which basically grants an extension to a statutory override. So the way to describe this in real layman's terms is, in the private sector, if there is valuation gains or losses, that has to hit your profit and loss account. So therefore, there'll be if it's a valuation gain, there'll be a benefit. If it's a valuation loss, it'll be a hit to your profit and loss account. What the statutory override does is that it removes that risk, and that volatility is dealt with in reserve. However, the government said they'll extend it for 2 more years, but during 25-26, those valuation gains and losses will be an impact on our profit and loss or our income expenditure accounts. That's something to be mindful in the coming months and how we manage that risk moving forward. Section 8 provides a budget performance that showed the in-year benefit of the LOBO refinancing of 48,000, but also a £1 million surplus in interest receivable. And that's because, as I mentioned earlier, when we devised this strategy, interest rates were still at record lows of 0.1%, and as we've seen in the report, interest rates rose to 4.25% by the end of March 23. The last few points on there is about compliance. Obviously, we can confirm that obviously we complied with all of the indicators that we set as part of the strategy in terms of our borrowing as well as our diversifying our investments. So I'm happy to take any questions on that, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Any questions? Councillor Edwards?
Thank you, Chair. I apologise if you covered this in your report there, but just a sort of layman's questions, really. How does our Brent District Council's borrowing compare to that of other local authorities? And in kind of layman's terms, are we borrowing for day-to-day spend?
Okay, there's two questions there. How we compare, obviously it's very difficult because obviously we don't have a HRA, so obviously we have to monitor against those authorities that do not have HRAs, and obviously we are borrowing very low in terms of our external borrowing. Obviously once you look at our capital financing requirement, we're borrowing about 21 million, both externally and internally. But when you compare to other districts outside, that's comparable. It's not a cause for concern. In terms of day-to-day borrowing, obviously we cannot borrow for day-to-day purposes. We can only really borrow for capital financing or basically refinancing our borrowing, our debt.
Do any other members have any questions? Councillor Wright.
Yeah, in item 5.3 on page 112, you said you paid back the LOBO, and you paid out a premium of 1.4 million to the bank, so we could have a saving of 890,000. That seems to be, you're paying out 1.4 million to save 900,000. So to me, that's a £500,000 loss. I hope I'm wrong on that.
The 890k cumulative saving is obviously after the impact of the £1.4 million premium.
Right.
So obviously the saving that we're making from going down from interest rate of 4.7% down to 2.59% is not only the 890k saving over the 20 years, but it also covers the premium.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, we are asked to recommend submission of the Treasury Management Annual Report for 2022-23 to full council. So please can I have a proposer to move the recommendations? Councillor Munday, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Ball. So the recommendation has been moved and seconded. I will now put this to the votes. All those in favour, please indicate by show of hands. That is unanimous. The recommendation has been approved. So the recommendation has been approved, so I'll now proceed with our last item of the agenda, the annual governance statement. So this report is set out on pages 117 to 131 of the agenda, and I will invite Phil Myers, the Head of Finance, to present his report.
Yep. So this is another report really on the 22-23 financial year. So the annual governance statement is something that we're required to produce annually. It gets published in our accounts, and basically it's something that the auditors will also have sort of consider and make sure that what we put in the annual governance statement is consistent with what their understanding of our situation is. So the purpose of the annual governance is really to provide some evidence and really a sort of summary of a review of our effectiveness of our system of internal control that has been in place during the 22-23 financial year. The statement itself is formally approved by the Leader of the Council and the Chief Executive, and again, the views of this committee obviously are important to giving those two the assurance that they need to be able to sign this. So the governance statement is prepared. There's a sort of best practice framework that's in place through Solace and SIPFA, and we also have our own local code of governance, which is one of the pieces of our governance arrangements that, again, this committee would from time to time review and approve. So the actual annual governance statement, the draft is set out in the appendix. The review and preparation of this has been carried out in conjunction with some key officers, so the Chief Executive, the Senior Management Team, the Monitoring Officer, and Angie in her role as the Internal Audit Manager. So core elements of the governance framework are detailed, and they're sort of commented against 7 principles that are set out in the best practice framework, and those are described on pages 122 to 126. So essentially that's just setting out how the council is complying or meeting those principles. The review of the effectiveness then is set out in section 3 of the statement, which is pages 126 to 130, and that also includes the conclusion of Angie as the audit manager, which was referenced earlier this evening in terms of her opinion on the internal control arrangements, risk management and governance, where she was able to conclude that there is adequate assurance that the key business processes and financial systems are in accordance with best practice. So I think that's the sort of backward-looking aspect of the statement, and then there is the, I suppose, forward-looking element in section 4, which then just sets out some of the key issues where that will have a bearing and also where we may be looking to improve our governance arrangements. So those are, we've got a peer review that we are currently in the process of organising, and that be delivered through the Local Government Association, and that's planned to be undertaken during the autumn. We had an external quality assessment of our internal audit function carried out at the start of this calendar year, and the report and conclusion of that was reported to this committee. Following that, there was an action plan, and so part of the work around our governance arrangements will be addressing that action plan and implementing that. And that's one thing that this committee will monitor as well as part of the role, and that's something that Angie will bring on a regular basis, the progress against that action plan. There's also the revision to the risk management policy and strategy, and that's obviously was an earlier item this evening, so that will now go on to Cabinet. And then there's also reference there about developing our policies and processes around the sort of calling agile and flexible working. So I'm sure members have heard much about this, how we're changing and responding to a different working environment. But that does, with it, bring the need to review our policies and processes around that. And then finally, just recognising that we've had the local elections, we've got a new council. There's quite an extensive member development programme that is due to be delivered over the coming months. So, as I said, so the AGS will get again reviewed by the external auditor. So there may be some comments that BDO make and might ask us to or suggest some changes. So there is a delegation that's being requested in the report to be able to make those amendments. Obviously, if there's anything substantial that arose, then clearly that would be brought back to this committee.
Thank you very much, Phil. Do any members wish to speak on this item? Okay, so as there aren't any questions, we are asked the following. So firstly, to approve the annual governance statement prior to it being signed by the Chief Executive and the Leader of the Council, and also to give delegated authority to the Section 151 officer to make any necessary amendments to the annual governance statement as a result of its review by the external auditor prior to its inclusion in the final published statement of accounts. So please can I have a proposer to move the recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Ball. And can I have a seconder as well, please? Thank you, Councillor Edwards. So the recommendations have been moved and seconded. I will now put this to the vote. All those in favour, please indicate by a show of hands. And that is unanimous. So the recommendations have been approved. We will now proceed to the final item. So I did say that this was the final item, but you'll be pleased to know that there is no urgent business this evening. So this item concludes our business for this evening, and I will therefore close the meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee at 9 o'clock. So thank you, members, for your attendance this evening, and to those watching the YouTube broadcast, and I wish you all a very good night. Thank you, officers, as well. Thank you.